Hey everyone! Today, we're going to be taking a look at 5 of the most disturbing family massacre cases. The first case is the Schmidt family.
At about 6:23 this morning, the Jackson County Sheriff's Office and the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation were called to the Massacre Cave State Park campground on the report of a shooting. When officers arrived, they located 3 deceased bodies at a campsite in the Massacre Cave State Park campground.
The full details of what happened at Massacre Caves State Park is shocking to say the least. Why was this family murdered? And what is the fate of the only surviving son now? Our love and respect go out to all those who knew and loved the victims of this tragic crime, and all those affected by this case. 42-year-old Tyler Schmidt was the husband of Sarah Schmidt, who was also 42. He grew up in Cedar Falls, Iowa, United States. Tyler's wife, Sarah, was born in Kansas City, Missouri, but lived most of her childhood in St. Louis. She had 3 siblings. They both attended Truman State University in Kirksville, Missouri, and then lived in Lawrence, Kansas. Tyler was an IT software engineer at Trevapae, an overland park based in Kansas, while Sarah worked at the University of Kansas. The couple had 2 kids, Arlo Schmidt, who was 9 years old, and Lula Schmidt, who was 6 years old. In 2018, the family moved to Cedar Falls, and then Sarah started working at the community library. This family loved the outdoors. They enjoyed hiking, Christmas activities, and camping. They started camping a year and a half before the tragic incident. The children loved the outdoors, so they made it a tradition to go camping. The Schmidt family went camping as usual on this day at Massacre Caves State Park. They had set up their tent on the park grounds. On July 22, in the early morning, as the sun rose, before 6:30 a.m., the unfortunate event took place. An assailant murdered 3 members of the Schmidt family in their sleep, leaving the son, Arlo, who had escaped from the murder scene. Tyler was shot multiple times and stabbed to death. Sarah was stabbed to death, and Lula died from strangulation and a gunshot. Anthony Orlando Sherwin, a 23-year-old man from La Vista, Nebraska, was suspected to be the murderer. He also had been traveling and came camping at the same park with his family. His father, Joe Sherwin, and his mother, Cecilia Sherwin, but they were 75 yards away from the Schmidt family. Arlo, the son who escaped, ran out to cry out for help. He met another camper who happened to be Sherwin's mom, trying to explain the situation to her. Cecilia, Sherwin's mom, held the boy's hand and walked fast to the entrance of the camp. It was there she called 911.
Jackson County 911, where's your emergency?
Massacre Caves.
Massacre Caves?
Yeah.
Okay, what's going on out there?
Shooting. And he said that his parents were shot in the blood.
Oh, I don't know if that's his fault.
He doesn't know if they're shot. But scary.
I woke up and there was someone in black clothes, and they had a weapon, and my sister was screaming.
Were there any shots, or what kind of weapon did he have?
I think it was some kind of small gun.
What is your name?
Cecilia Sherwin. You're the park ranger?
Okay, you go ahead and talk to him, okay?
Okay, thank you very much.
She explained what happened to the dispatcher and said that she ran with the boy to the entrance for safety, thinking the shooter was going to come out and shoot them too. The dispatcher asked to speak with Arlo to explain what he saw. He said that he was in the tent with his dad, mom, and sister. When he woke up, he saw a man in black clothes with a weapon. He heard his sister screaming and gunshot sounds as he ran out. He paused, then said that he felt his family were hurt. The call lasted for 23 minutes. Then a park ranger arrived immediately. From the call and observations, it was established that the killer acted alone, and no accomplice was found or linked to the killer. When the police arrived, they found 3 of the Schmidt family dead. Then after a thorough search, Sherwin was found dead somewhere in the camp. Investigations conducted showed that Sherwin committed suicide. He died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound. the officers arrived at the incident scene before 6:30 a.m. and asked that all campers should evacuate the park. They were all interviewed by the officers trying to gather solid information to use for further investigation. It was then they found that Sherwin wasn't part of the campers that left the camp. Also, when they heard that he was armed, they surrounded the park in search for him until they found him dead. From the search and little observations made, it was determined that Sherwin was the killer.
Officers found the body of this man, Anthony Sherwin. He's 23 years old. Sherwin appears to have suffered a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Authorities have not confirmed how the other campers were killed, nor Sherwin's relationship to them. We are told there is no danger to the public. However, the park is considered an active crime scene, so it is closed to the public because of the murders.
2 weeks later, on Friday, August 4th, autopsy results came out and the cause of death was reviewed. The police have refused to respond to some questions, like if the gun found on Sherwin's body was the same used for the murder. The Sherwins demanded the full and final reports. They asked the lead investigators whether a strong match for the gun was seen, but no reply was given. Debbie McClung, Strategic Communications Bureau Chief with the Iowa Department of Public Safety, said that the information they demand is not public. They can only share immediate facts and circumstances of the case. The DCI also declared that all evidence collected from the time of the incident to the present is substantial enough to conclude that Sherwin was the one who committed the homicide, and he acted alone. The Sherwins don't believe it. Cecilia said that her son couldn't have been the killer. His character and the evidence shared so far do not prove that her son committed the act. She said that Arlo mentioned that the criminal wore black, but her son wore green that day because she had given the green shorts to him that day before the shooting as the only clean clothes remaining from traveling and camping. She also explained how devastated they were as parents to hear that their son is dead, and not going back home with him is still very hard to fathom. She described her son as kind, calm, sensitive, and an outstanding student. She said he was an aspiring businessman, and also said that her son would never do such an act. She sympathized with Arlo, saying that she regularly thinks of him. The Sherwins went ahead to independently get an autopsy report for their son, but the results made them even more confused. The police also refused to disclose the particular area in the park where Sherwin's body was found. The Quad City Times and the Dispatch-Argus requested multiple records related to the shooting under the Freedom of Information Act and Iowa's Open Records Law. However, the Iowa Department of Public Safety denied the request. The newspapers sought information about the incident, hoping to gain access to various documents. Despite their efforts to obtain these records through legal channels designed to ensure transparency, their attempts were unsuccessful. The Department of Public Safety's refusal to release the information prevented the publications from obtaining the requested details. Cecilia had concluded that the Department of Public Safety was totally ignoring all requests. The police could not say whether Sherwin had a criminal record. There were no records of criminal activities committed in the past by Sherwin found in the online court records in Nebraska and Iowa after searching. The only record that Sherwin had with the police prior to the incident was when he went to a police station on July 2017 to report someone who tried to use his insurance to get dental work done in Oklahoma, and he later called the police to inform them that his insurance company had made a mistake by sending him someone else's bill. This record was released by the La Vista Police Department. No motive behind this particular violent murder has been found. The families of both the victims and the suspected murderer have confirmed that both parties have never met before. Mitch Mortvedt, Iowa DCI Assistant Director from the investigation, said that there was nothing they could establish that precipitated anything other than the randomness of the murder. He also said that investigators have found hints as to what the motive was, but don't plan to release that information to the public.
Local 4's Matt Holden reports they can't find any motive so far.
Just really
unthinkable emotions that we're dealing with right now.
4 days since the shocking murder-suicide shooting at Maquoketa Cave State Park, investigators are now moving closer towards final conclusions on what happened and final answers to everyone's questions. But unfortunately, some of those answers may be the fact that we never will get answers.
There was nothing that we can establish that precipitated anything other than just the randomness of it.
Mitch Mortvedt with Iowa's Division of Criminal Investigations has been on this case, and he says one baffling conclusion they could be moving towards is that the alleged killer, 23-year-old Anthony Sherwin, didn't know the people he killed whatsoever and may have carried out the killings with little motive.
At this time, we have not been able to come across any type of interaction between him and the Schmidt family, nothing that precipitated it. As far as we know, again, after talking to, his family that he was with, his parents, as well as other campers.
The first reaction was the evacuation of camps surrounding the state park. The executive assistant of the Christian camp, Beth Salak, said that Fridays are usually pickup days for campers at the Christian-focused camp. It is about 1.5 miles away from the Maquoketa Caves, but at 9:11 a.m., when the local law enforcement sent a notification to the directors that there was a violent murder situation at the state park, and they were asked to evacuate immediately, the plans changed. She said that their staff had told the campers that they were going to do a surprise visit to Little Bear Park in Maquoketa. They got the campers excited and loaded everyone on the bus. They did a great job in making sure that the campers had no idea there was a shoot situation trying to be uncovered, going on 1.5 miles down the road to avoid fear and panic. There have been many other reactions to the heartbreaking news from close relatives, community members, and other personnel in Iowa. The mayor, Rob Green, posted on Facebook about the incident. He announced the news and information about the funeral arrangement. He said that he knew Sarah well and that she and her family were regular walkers in the Sartori Park neighborhood. He also said that he was supposed to work with her that week on a public library tech presentation. Green said that he was devastated by the deaths and said that details were in the works about services and memorials. He further announced that the Cedar Falls Library would be closed on Saturday in July when the incident happened, for the sake of the staff who loved and worked with Sarah. He offered his condolences to the Schmidts' many friends, neighbors, and co-workers as they tried to process the horrible tragedy. After learning of the homicide, Maggie Mulhausen, a frequent patron of the Bluff Lake Catfish Farm restaurant, expressed her shock, saying that the atmosphere in the restaurant was much quieter than it would have been on a typical summer Friday. The restaurant is located so close to the park that both customers and employees typically drive through it to get there. She continued by saying that she saw the incident as proof of the ongoing mental health crisis in the United States, and that it was tragic and sad that incidents like this still occurred in the world. The eastern entrance to the park, which was closed off throughout Friday afternoon on the day of the incident, was being watched by armed DNR conservation officers, according to DNR spokesman Tammy Krausman, who announced that the gate will remain closed until July 28th. On the day of the tragedy, all camping bookings were also canceled and refunded. That same Friday afternoon, Iowa DNR Director Kayla Lyon issued a statement in which she expressed her sorrow for the families affected by the tragic incident. Reparer Ashley Hinson of the United States also made a statement on Twitter on the horrific and senseless act of violence that occurred. He expressed sympathy for Iowans and reassured them that they would continue to monitor the situation until it is resolved.
The Cedar Falls community is remembering a family who lost 3 members in the senseless killing at Maquoketa Cave State Park. Just one little boy survived.
Our hearts are beyond broken and our lives shattered to pieces. We go on for Arlo to love and support him.
The city held a celebration of life ceremony for Sarah, Tyler, and their 6-year-old daughter, Lula. Their son, 9-year-old Arlo, survived. Several family members spoke to the crowd, saying the Schmidts were lovers of the outdoors and big family people. Arlo was not there, but Cedar Falls Mayor Rob Green says they hope this is something he can look back on when he's older.
Many other official personnel made posts and comments about the incident, expressing their grief and reassuring the community members of safety. The firm that employed Tyler also issued a statement stating how devastated they were at the hearing of the terrible and untimely passing of their colleague, his wife, and their daughter. They continued by describing how Tyler was a delight to work with and how he was an exemplary professional, a partner to their clients, and a mentor to his co-workers. The company expressed its profound sympathies to his family and his surviving son Arlo and said that they will miss him greatly. 2 days after Sarah, her husband Tyler, and their daughter Lula were shot and killed while camping at the park, Sarah's brother Adam Morehouse spoke on Sunday about his memories of his older sister and her family. According to him, the Schmidt family represented the perfect Midwestern family of 4, admired by all.
This was completely random. Nobody in either families knew anybody. We didn't know the suspect. The suspect didn't know us. We don't know of any interaction that occurred. It was simply this individual woke up that morning and decided to pick a tent and walk into that tent where my sister and her family was sleeping and never got a chance to wake up.
Morehouse says the Schmidt family were simply enjoying a family vacation at the park, doing what they loved, before becoming victims of the tragedy.
About 1.5 years ago, they started camping for the first time, and the kids took to it immediately. So that was their thing that they loved to do as a family, was to get outside and be together.
As announced by the mayor earlier, the memorial event to honor the Schmidt family, organized by the Cedar Fall community, took place on Tuesday, August 2, 2022, from 5:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. at Overman Park. The park was set aside for neighbors to gather before the ceremony. The event was set up like that because, according to the mayor, even though it was not a festive event, Tyler and Sarah would have loved to see the neighbors come together. The event featured stories about the Schmidt family. It was live-streamed for family and friends to watch so that they could see how much the Schmidt family was loved by all. The memorial event drew about 200 people coming to honor and sympathize with the Schmidt family. According to DNR, a temporary memorial site had been set up to honor the Schmidt family at the entrance sign of the Massacre Caves State Park near the Visitor Center.
In today's top story at 6:02, remembering a family killed. A celebration of life took place for the Schmidt family who was attacked while at Massacre Caves State Park earlier this month. Tyler, Sarah, and their 6-year-old daughter, Lula Schmidt, were shot and killed by a gunman. Their son, Arlo, was able to escape. The Schmidt family lived in Cedar Falls, where Sarah was a librarian at the public library, and they were active in the community.
And I mentioned that we were smitten. Tyler and Sarah possess the superpower of truly seeing people and helping people to feel seen and heard.
A GoFundMe page was set up to help him after the tragic death news, and by Monday afternoon, $205,000 was already raised. Tyler's company contributed $5,000 to the account as their support to Tyler's son. A separate meal train was also created to help the victims' families. Right now, the account for Arlo has collected $294,000, and it's still accepting donations. He is living with an aunt and uncle in Cedar Falls, Iowa. KWQC reports the state of the park exactly 1 year later. The park is very active, and families are still camping at the park, having fun and enjoying the caves. The news interviewed Scott Carroll from Wisconsin, who was camping with his family. He said in his interview that he won't allow the scary and violent event to ruin his time with his wife and daughter.
Tomorrow marks 1 year since 3 members of a Cedar Falls family were murdered while camping at the Massacre Caves State Park, and there's still many questions left unanswered. Tyler, Sarah, and 6-year-old Lulu were found dead inside their tent around 6 in the morning. The family's 9-year-old son escaped and survived the attack. Investigators found the body of 23-year-old Anthony Sherwin near the scene. They say he died from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Investigators say the Nebraska man was in the park camping with his family at the time of the murders. The Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation said evidence showed Sherwin acted alone in killing the 3 family members, but investigators never released a motive. They also never released how or if the family and Sherwin knew each other. Sherwin's mother told reporters she did not believe her son did it.
Also, the case of the murder was closed since no substantial evidence was found to further investigation. That's the end of our video for today. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you think Sherwin committed the triple homicide? Share your opinions in the comments section below. The next case is the Oda family massacre. He was a father and husband and was meant to love and care for the lives of those handed to him, but he turned out to be the same person who ended their lives. Why would a family man give in to the inner demons constantly whispering to him to end the lives of those he called family? On that day, nothing could stop this man from brutally murdering the people he loved the most. Not their cries, not the fear and terror that filled their eyes as he murdered them. Nothing. He had already made up his mind. This is another story reminding us that a seemingly ordinary person can have the darkest motives brooding in their hearts, and even the most unsuspecting person can be a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. Our love and respect goes out to all those who knew and loved the victims of the Oda family, and all those affected by this case. On March 10, 2024, a tragic event happened in a quiet neighborhood in Honolulu called Manoa. Paris Oda, a 46-year-old man, took the life of his family. He stabbed his wife, Naoko Oda, and their 3 kids, Sakurato Oda, their 17-year-old daughter, 12-year-old Oreo, and 10-year-old Nana Oda, and then proceeded to kill himself as well. Oda used a kitchen knife to fatally stab himself and his family, and ended up single-handedly wiping out the entire Manoa family. The police in Honolulu took charge of investigating this sad and heartbreaking event, and they concluded that this mass killing was the second deadliest murder in Honolulu in almost 25 years. Oda, the head of the family, was a chiropractor, which means he helped people with their backs and necks. He had an office near a big shopping center called Ala Moana Center. If you looked at his Facebook, Instagram, or any other social media pages, you would think he was a peaceful and calm person. But in 1997, when he was a teenager growing up on the beautiful island of Kauai, he meddled in a little bit of crime. He entered someone's private property without permission, and he got in trouble for it. But he presumably learned his lesson, and the crime was erased from his record after he avoided other forms of trouble. It was a Sunday morning when the police received a distress call. The caller reported hearing screams coming from a house on Waloa Place. The police rushed to the scene, arriving at the Oda family's home at 3622 Waloa Place. It was early in the morning at 8:34 a.m. When they got there, they couldn't find the person who made the call. The officers walked up to the house and knocked on the door, but no one answered. They listened carefully, but there was no sound of screaming. They even asked a neighbor if they had heard anything, but the neighbor said they hadn't heard a thing. Everything seemed quiet and normal, so they felt it could have been a false emergency. Little did they know something was very wrong.
Real, a father accused of murdering his 3 children and wife and then turning the knife on himself.
The police officer wanted to get some more information, so they tried to call the 911 caller back. But there was a problem. The caller's phone number was from another country, and the police system couldn't call it back. This was a limitation that the police were working to fix, but it meant they couldn't follow up with the caller right away. So, the officers did the next best thing. They carefully searched the area around the Oda family's home, looking for any signs of trouble. They made notes about what they saw, and then they left the scene. It was almost 9 a.m. by the time they finished up and headed back to their patrol car. Just 15 minutes after the police left the Oda family's home, the 911 caller phoned again. This time, an officer hurried back to the house in Manoa. When they arrived, they found the caller standing outside, waiting for them. The caller was a woman who rented a room from the Oda family, and she was clearly very troubled. Her hands were shaking, and her face was pale. She had seen something that had left her deeply disturbed, and she needed the police to know about it. The tenant took a deep breath, and with her voice shaking, she began to tell them what she had heard. She had been in her room, fast asleep, when she was woken up immediately by screams. It was sometime between 2 and 2:30 in the morning, and the screams were loud and terrifying. She froze, her heart racing as the screams grew louder and closer. The screams were coming from right outside her door. She quickly locked herself in, too afraid to open the door. And then she saw something that terribly frightened her. She saw blood seeping under her door, spreading across the floor like a dark stain. She felt trapped, too scared to come out. She waited until she couldn't wait anymore, then climbed out of her window. The police officers rushed to the scene she told them about immediately. They reached the front door, but it was locked, refusing to open up despite their efforts. They looked through the window and saw a person lying motionless, unresponsive to their calls. The officers knew they had to act fast. They made their way to the back door, their guns drawn, and cautiously entered the house. What they saw was gruesome. Oda lay in the hallway, his body covered in stab wounds, surrounded by a pool of blood. He was dead, and the officers knew that they had walked into a crime scene.
They were able to see an unresponsive person through the window. They called out to the person but received no answer. Officers entered through the back door and found the unresponsive male laying in blood in the hallway. He had stab wounds to the chest and was deceased. He was later identified as the suspect, 46-year-old Paris Oda.
The police went into the house, room by room. They were looking for clues. That was when the police found Naoko, Sakurako, Orion, and Nana murdered. The police saw that they had tried to fight back and that they had cuts on their hands and wrists. The police felt that they must have died because of their injuries. They probably died a few hours after it happened. The police also concluded that the incident took place around 2 or 2:30 in the morning, according to the tenant's statement. It was around that time that she heard screams and tried to call the police. It turned out that Oda had been struggling with financial problems for a long time. In 2023, he was in deep trouble, and in February 2024, he confessed to his wife that he hadn't paid taxes in years. He told his relatives that he would rather die than go to prison for not paying taxes. He even said that he wanted to kill his family and burn down their house. Oda had texted his wife in February, saying they needed a plan to do it and take their children with them, because he believed no one could take better care of them than himself. This "it" will be discussed later in this video, so stay tuned. Oda also attempted to buy a gun in March, but that didn't work out for him. Despite all these warning signs, Oda was said to have never been violent before, but you never know the real intentions of a man who feels inadequate and useless to his family, and on that fateful morning, something went terribly wrong, reflecting his original intentions. On a Friday afternoon, Lieutenant Dina Thoems from the Honolulu Police Department stood in front of a crowd of reporters. She was there to share some important information about the investigation the police had been working on. She stated that after they started looking into the life of Oda, they found out that he was struggling with money problems towards the end of 2023. Oda had been having trouble paying his bills on time. He was behind on his car payments, tuition, and loan payments. He confided in a family member, saying that he felt responsible for fixing the problem. He also shared his worries with his wife, and together they tried to make some changes to get back on track. But unfortunately, their financial struggles continued. As the months went by, Oda tried to sell a second property he owned in Aiea with the help of a real estate agent, but even that didn't seem to help. In February, he revealed to his wife that he hadn't paid taxes in years. His chiropractor business was also struggling, and he didn't have enough patience to keep up with the bills. To make ends meet, he even started driving for Uber.
In February, Paris' concerns increased, and he told his wife that he had not paid taxes for years. He was not getting enough patients at his chiropractor business, and he started to work as an Uber driver.
The police investigation uncovered all of these details, and Lieutenant Thomas shared them with the public that Friday afternoon. Remember that earlier it was stated that in the middle of February, Oda sent a text message to his wife that they needed to plan to do it, and it was something that he thought would change the course of their lives. He told her they needed to make a plan they had discussed before, a plan to end their lives and the lives of their children. Oda was at a breaking point. He felt like he couldn't go on, and he believed that no one else could take care of their children as well as he could. He thought that if he and his wife were gone, their children would be lost too. His wife, Naoko, tried to be positive and encouraging. She suggested they start fresh in Japan, where her parents lived. But Oda was too exhausted, too drained. He felt like he had nothing left to give. After that, he started to pull away, becoming quiet and distant. This was a turning point in their story, a moment when the struggles they had faced for so long became even more overwhelming. The police would later find this text message, and it would become a crucial part of their investigation into what happened next.
In the middle of February, Paris texted his wife that they needed to plan to do it. He said he could not take it anymore, and he told her that their children needed to come with them because no one could take better care of them than he could. Naoko tried to be optimistic and encouraging with Paris. She suggested that they move to Japan with her parents.
As March arrived, the financial worries grew. Tax season was approaching, and he felt overwhelmed. He discussed selling their home in Manoa with a realtor, hoping to find a way out of his financial struggles. But Oda's anxiety and fear took a dark turn. It was at this point that he confided in relatives that he would rather die than face the shame of going to jail for unpaid taxes. In a desperate and alarming statement, he also threatened to harm his own family and burn their house to the ground.
Paris's financial distress heightened in March as the tax season approached. He told relatives that he would rather die before going to jail for unpaid taxes. At that time, he also said that he would kill his family and burn the house down.
It was around the same time that Oda reached out to someone with a chilling request. He wanted a gun, but the person never responded. Hawaii News Now talked to Annette Oda, the mother of Paris Oda. Annette said that her son grew up on the beautiful island of Kauai, and that the family is struggling to understand what could have happened. When the interviewers asked Annette if she saw any signs that something was wrong, she didn't want to talk about it. This is a very sad story after all, and the family is trying to make sense of it. As families searched for answers, Oda's chiropractic office in the Pan Am building was closed. A former patient, Martha Randolph, was shocked by the news that he had harmed his family. She said that there was absolutely no sign and no indication that Oda was going through such a dark time, not even one word out of place. She added that she trusted him completely, but he could have twisted her head off. She had no doubt whatsoever that she was in good hands, but now is terrified to find out he could do such evil to his own family. A neighbor and friend of the family had some fond memories to share with Hawaii News Now. He said that Naoko would sometimes help out at her husband's chiropractic clinic, and that the family was very excited about Sakurako's upcoming graduation from Iolani School. They were even exploring college options for her, both in Hawaii and on the mainland. Sakurako had big dreams as she wanted to become a nurse and a great cook. The mother and daughter duo were quite the team. In 2019, they even ran the Hapalua Marathon together, finishing just 3 places apart. On a certain Monday, Hawaii News Now spoke to many people in the neighborhood where the tragic event happened. Most of them didn't know the family very well, but they were all deeply affected by what happened. One woman was so sad that she cried all day. The neighbors couldn't understand how such a terrible thing could happen. Irvin Yoshino, one of the Oda family's neighbors, expressed how tragic the entire situation is, and the fact that everybody is feeling it because it feels like part of their own family is gone.
Tragic. everybody's feeling it, and everybody's just, it feels like part of your family. We go on our walks, we go down there and we see the kids riding their bikes, skateboard.
Another person who talked to Hawaii News Now said he had a feeling something was wrong. He stated that something didn't feel right and that he could see something was off. According to him, they seemed sad.
One person says he sensed something was wrong.
Just didn't feel right seeing the kids walk past us throughout the week, making eye contact. I could see something in their eyes, like they were sad, couldn't figure it out, and then seeing this on the news.
After the unfortunate event, the schools where the victims studied wanted to help their students and staff deal with their emotions. The 3 schools on the island of Oahu offered counselors to support those who were grieving. Iolani School, where Sakurako was a student, sent an email to parents on Sunday night. They invited students, teachers, and staff to come together and share their feelings. They even had a special early morning chapel service. Orion, the 6th grader, attended Sikh's charter school in Nuuanu. The school's leader reached out to parents to let them know that crisis counselors were available to help their children work through their grief. Nana, the youngest, attended Manoa Elementary School. The Department of Education sent a letter to parents offering a crisis intervention team to support the school community. All 3 schools decided to help their students and staff deal with the loss of their friends, students, and classmates. They wanted to make sure everyone had someone to talk to and a safe place to express their feelings. Britt Young, a therapist who helps families, said that parents need to talk to their children about what happened, but they should explain it in a way that's appropriate for their child's age. Britt said that younger children, like those in elementary and middle school, might feel scared and worried. They might think that if a person could hurt their own children, someone could hurt them too. Parents can help their children feel better by reassuring them and talking with them. With older children like teenagers and young adults, parents can have a more open and honest conversation. Britt suggested letting them ask questions and answering them in a thoughtful way. This can help them understand and process their feelings. Just being present and offering comfort can make a big difference, Britt said. Parents can help their children feel safe and supported by talking to them in a way that works best for their age and needs. By listening and offering comfort, parents can help their children heal and feel better.
Rako Oda attended Iolani School. Counselors went to all of her classes today to assist students and teachers who were struggling with the news. She was a senior set to graduate this summer. The 12-year-old Orion Oda was a 6th grader at Sikh's charter school in Nuuanu. A very close-knit group of students and parents there. Counselors also offered support to them. And the youngest, Nana Oda, attended Manoa Elementary School. The DOE notified parents that a crisis intervention team was there for anyone who needs help. Because the victims range in age and grade, counselors handle it differently at the various campuses. It's important to note that the adults will also be affected, the teachers and faculty.
Intense reaction of like anger perhaps and grief for perhaps a family you didn't even know. I'm so angry this could happen. Who would do that? So it's not like we're adults and we just handle it completely, we process it without going to that angry place. It's normal to feel angry. It's normal to wonder who would do this.
For children struggling with this, Young suggests talking to the younger children without too many details, but also listening and letting them ask questions, even if it's questions you don't have answers to. With the teens, an open dialogue and sometimes just comfort can be helpful.
On a Tuesday evening, the Waikiki community came together to mourn the loss of the lives that were taken too soon. Hundreds of people gathered on the lawn of the Waikiki Shell to remember and honor the Oda children, Sakurako, Orion, and Nana. The organizers of the vigil wanted to create a space where those who knew the Oda family could come together, share their grief, and support one another. It was a chance for classmates, friends, teammates, and teachers to also pay tribute to the 3 siblings who they knew as friends and classmates. As the evening came in Waikiki, the crowd gathered on the lawn to share their pains and sorrow and their memories of the Oda children. It was an emotional evening. People were crying and hugging those who needed comfort, and stories of the impact that Sakurako, Orion, and Nana had on those around them were being shared. Even after more than 2 weeks since the tragedy, many people were still struggling to accept what happened. Matilda Tamasisi, who played soccer with Nana, said that it's terribly hard for her to believe what happened. She explained that even small things, like seeing a soccer field, can bring back sad memories and make her cry again. A GoFundMe page has been set up to raise money for the Oda family's funeral expenses. Taurus Manzano, Oda's eldest daughter from a previous relationship, and her mother, Annalyn, are organizing the effort. They hope to raise $100,000 to cover funeral and legal expenses. The community is coming together to support the Oda family in any way they can. What are your thoughts on this case? What do you think provokes people to do such a horrific thing to their own family? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. The next case we'll be looking at is the Yates family murders. Andrea Paya Yates is a woman who had severe mental health issues and struggles, all leading to a tragedy. This event shocked the nation and led to questions about mental health and the law. In the early hours of June 20th, 2001, Houston, Texas, was rocked by a chilling confession. Yates, a 36-year-old mother, admitted to drowning her 5 children, Noah Yates, John Yates, Paul Yates, Luke Yates, and Mary Yates, in their bathtub. This horrific act brought to light the severe mental health issues she had been battling for years, including postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, and schizophrenia. Yates was born in Houston, Texas on July 3, 1974. She was the youngest of 5 children in a family with a rich immigrant heritage. Her mother, Yuta Karen Kohler, was a German immigrant, and her father, Andrew Emmett Kennedy, was the son of Irish immigrants. Despite struggling with bulimia and depression during her teenage years, Yates excelled academically. She graduated as valedictorian of Milby High School in 1982, where she was also the captain of the swim team and an officer in the National Honor Society. Yates embarked on her journey in nursing by completing a pre-nursing program at the University of Houston and eventually graduating from the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston. Her career as a registered nurse spanned from 1986 to 1994, during which she dedicated herself to her work at the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, earning a reputation for her commitment and professionalism, all while silently grappling with her mental health challenges. In the warm summer of 1989, Yates's path crossed with Russell Rusty Yates at the picturesque Sunscape Apartments in bustling Houston. Russell, a talented engineer at NASA, quickly formed a deep connection with Yates, leading them to decide to move in together shortly thereafter. Their bond blossomed, culminating in marriage on April 17, 1993, marking the official start of their journey as husband and wife. As devout evangelical Christians, the Yates family held firm beliefs in the importance of expanding their family through childbirth, a decision that would later carry profound and tragic consequences. Their first child, Noah, entered the world in the chilly month of February 1994. Soon after, Russell's career took them to sunny Florida, where they settled into a cozy trailer in the town of Seminole. However, their time in Florida was brief, prompting a return to Houston and a move into a comfortable GMC motorhome. It was following the birth of their 4th child, the adorable Luke, that Yates's mental health began to show signs of severe deterioration. On June 20, 1999, Russell returned home to find his wife shaking and chewing on her fingers, a clear indication of the turmoil she was experiencing. The following day, Yates's struggles intensified as she attempted to take her own life by overdosing on pills, leading to her hospitalization and the prescription of antidepressants. Despite this intervention, Yates' mental state continued to decline, with further suicide attempts and multiple hospitalizations, ultimately culminating in a diagnosis of postpartum psychosis. The struggle with mental illness.
Rusty Yates returned home from work to a nightmare. His 5 children had been drowned in the bathtub by their own mother, his wife, Andrea Yates.
Yates's first psychiatrist, Dr. Eileen Starbranch, strongly advised against having more children, warning that it would likely trigger further psychotic episodes. Despite this, Yates and Russell conceived their 5th child, Mary, shortly after Yates's discharge from the hospital. In March 2000, Yates stopped taking her medication and gave birth to Mary 9 months later. For a time, she seemed to be coping well, but the death of her father on March 12, 2001, marked the beginning of a severe downward spiral. Yates ceased taking her medication, began mutilating herself, and read the Bible obsessively. Her condition worsened to the point of requiring immediate hospitalization. Under the care of Dr. Muhammad Saeed, Yates was treated and released multiple times. On May 3, 2001, she reached a near catatonic state and filled the bathtub, initially planning to drown her children, but ultimately deciding against it. Her psychiatrist, believing she was suicidal, had her hospitalized once more. Despite the continued treatment, Yates's mental health remained fragile. On June 22, 2001, Yates carried out the unthinkable, drowning her 5 children, Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and Mary, in the bathtub of their home. This tragic event forced the nation to confront the complexities of mental illness and the adequacy of legal frameworks like the Manhattan Rules and the irresistible impulse test for sanity. The Manhattan Rule states, a person is not responsible for criminal conduct if, at the time of such conduct as a result of mental disease or defect, he lacks substantial capacity to appreciate the criminality, wrongfulness of his conduct, or to conform his conduct to the requirements of law. At the time of the murders, the family was living in the Houston suburb of Clear Lake City. Yates continued under Dr. Muhammad's care until June 20, 2001, when Russell left for work, leaving her alone to watch the children against Dr. Muhammad's instructions to supervise her around the clock. Russell's mother, Dora Yates, was scheduled to arrive an hour later to take over for Yates. In that hour, Yates drowned all 5 children, an act that shook the nation and sparked a profound reckoning with the challenges faced by individuals struggling with severe mental illness. She began her descent into madness by silencing her 3 youngest children, John, Paul, and Luke, laying their lifeless bodies in her bed. Next, she turned her attention to Mary, drowning her in the tub. The sound of the water was the last thing Mary heard. When Noah, the eldest, stumbled upon the horrific scene, he tried to flee, but his mother's grasp was too strong. She dragged him back, drowning him in the same tub where his sister had met her fate. The house was now a scene of unimaginable horror, with the bodies of 4 innocent children lying lifeless. Yates, still holding onto her sanity by a thread, called the police, her voice eerily calm as she requested an officer, but she refused to explain why. In a desperate attempt to complete her twisted plan, Yates called her husband Russell, her voice laced with a sense of urgency, telling him to come home immediately.
She then called 911 to report what she'd done.
You need an ambulance? No, I need a police officer. Yeah, send an ambulance.
Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and baby Mary, 7 years to just 6 months old. Her husband Rusty was working at the time. He returned to a scene of sheer terror.
Little did she know, her world was about to come crashing down around her. The sound of sirens pierced the air, and the nightmare that was unfolding would soon be exposed to the world. Yates confessed to drowning her 5 children, Noah, John, Paul, Luke, and Mary, in the bathtub of their home in Clear Lake City, Texas, on June 22, 2000. Before her second trial, she told Dr. Michael Wellner, a forensic psychiatrist, that she waited for Russell to leave for work before filling the bathtub, knowing he would prevent her from harming the children. After the murders, police found the family dog locked up. Russell informed Dr. Michael that it was normally allowed to roam free, suggesting Yates had caged it to prevent interference. Russell secured George Parnham, a family friend, as Yates's attorney. Despite expert testimony agreeing that Yates was psychotic, Texas law required proving she could not discern right from wrong to assert the insanity defense. In March 2002, a jury rejected the insanity defense, found Yates guilty, and sentenced her to life imprisonment with eligibility for parole in 40 years. The prosecution had sought the death penalty, but the jury refused. Yates's mental health had been fragile for years. Her first psychiatrist, Dr. Eileen, had strongly advised against having more children, warning that it would likely trigger further psychotic episodes. Despite this, Yates and Russell conceived their fifth child, Mary, shortly after Yates's discharge from the hospital. There was not much to be done about her case, as the results remained the same. The treatment she received, however, was ultimately unable to prevent the tragic events that unfolded on that fateful day. On January 6, 2005, a Texas Court of Appeals reversed Yates's convictions. California psychiatrist and prosecution witness Dr. Park Dietz admitted to giving materially false testimony, stating that an episode of Law and Order featured a woman who drowned her children and was acquitted because of insanity. Author Suzanne O'Malley, covering the trial, reported that no such episode existed. The appellate court unanimously held that the jury might have been influenced by Dietz's false testimony, necessitating a new trial. Yates again entered a plea of not guilty because of insanity on January 19, 2006. On February 1, 2006, she was granted release on bail on the condition that she be admitted to a mental health treatment facility. After 3 days of deliberations, Yates was found not guilty because of insanity in July 2006, as defined by the state of Texas. She was subsequently committed to the North Texas State Hospital Vernon campus, where she would receive treatment for her mental illness.
Even with a long and documented history of mental illness, including suicide attempts, she was charged and convicted of capital murder. But the verdict was later overturned, and in a subsequent trial, she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. She testified she believed her children's deaths would save their souls. Andrea Yates was committed to a Texas mental hospital where she remains today, now 52 years old.
In January 2007, Yates was moved to the Kerrville State Hospital, a low-security mental facility in Kerrville, Texas. This transfer was seen as a positive step in her recovery, as the Kerrville facility offered a less restrictive environment that would allow her to continue her rehabilitation and potentially reintegrate into society. The case of Andrea Yates has drawn significant public attention and sparked debates about mental illness, the insanity defense, and the treatment of individuals deemed not guilty because of insanity. Although the psychiatric experts for both the prosecution and the defense concurred that Yates was profoundly mentally ill, suffering from one of several psychotic disorders at the time she took the lives of her children, the state of Texas contended that she was, as per the legal definition, cognizant enough to recognize the rightness or wrongness of her actions despite her mental impairment. The prosecution further implied that a desire for spousal revenge was a motivating factor behind the killings, although the defense experts found no evidence to substantiate this assertion. The original jury believed that she was legally aware of her actions, yet they disagreed on the spousal revenge motive. Dr. Muhammad had advised Russell not to leave his wife unattended. However, in the weeks leading up to the drowning, Russell began leaving her alone with the children for brief periods, believing that this would enhance her independence, despite the instructions from her physicians. At a family gathering the weekend preceding the drowning, Russell announced that he had decided to leave Yates alone at home for an hour each morning and evening to prevent her from becoming entirely dependent on him and his mother for her maternal responsibilities. During a broadcast of Larry King Live, Brian Kennedy, a sibling of Yates, revealed that in 2001, while Russell was accompanying Yates to a specialized mental health facility, Russell had remarked to him that all people suffering from depression just needed a swift kick in the pants to feel better. Yates's mother was shocked and alarmed by Russell's proposed approach, noting that Yates wasn't stable enough to care for their children and had almost choked their daughter Mary while trying to force-feed her solid food. Author Susie Spencer and Suzanne documented that Dr. Mohammed, a respected medical professional, first learned that Yates wasn't under continuous supervision during a phone conversation with Russell, coinciding with the unfolding news of the tragic events. Yates's initial psychiatrist, Dr. Eileen, was surprised when Yates and Russell expressed a desire to stop her prescribed psychiatric medications to conceive another child, despite the doctor's explicit warnings against it. Russell insisted to the media that psychiatrists never informed him that Yates was psychotic or capable of harming their children. He claimed that had he known otherwise, they would never have considered having more children. However, Yates confided to her prison psychiatrist, Dr. Melissa Ferguson, that before their last child, she had expressed to Russell her reluctance to have sex due to warnings from Dr. Eileen that she might pose a danger to their children. Despite this, Russell, driven by his religious beliefs promoting procreation, convinced her that she could manage more children. Suzanne underscored Russell's persistent detachment from reality concerning expanding their family. Throughout the trial, Russell maintained his belief that Yates would be found not guilty and fantasized about having more children with her after successful treatment in a mental health facility. He explored options such as surrogate motherhood and adoption to improve their situation before coming to terms with reality. Russell argued that Dr. Mohammed, as a psychiatrist, had a duty to identify and appropriately treat Yates's psychosis. According to Russell, Dr. Mohammed initially declined to continue Yates's prescription of the antipsychotic Haldol, which had effectively treated her during her first breakdown in 1999. Despite Russell's insistence that Dr. Mohammed review her medical history to consider previous successful treatments, Dr. Mohammed reluctantly prescribed Haldol, but discontinued it shortly afterward, expressing concerns about potential side effects. Russell testified that despite Yates's condition appearing to worsen just 2 days before the tragic drowning, Dr. Mohammed refused to extend the use of Haldol or readmit her to the hospital. Russell further stated that Yates was discharged from her final hospitalization in May 2001 while still too unwell, mentioning that hospital staff were frustrated and embarrassed due to constraints imposed by their insurance provider, Blue Cross Blue Shield. Russell and his family contended that Yates's manifestation of psychotic behavior preceding the tragic events stemmed from a combination of antidepressants prescribed by Dr. Mohammed. They pointed to Dr. Moira Dolan's observation that the antidepressant Effexor had added homicidal ideation to its warning label in 2005, suggesting relevance to their argument. Yates had been prescribed 450 mg of Effexor, twice the recommended maximum dosage, for a full month before the incident. However, Dr. Lucy Puryear, a defense expert witness, countered that such dosage levels were not uncommon and asserted they did not contribute to Yates's psychotic state. Instead, Dr. Lucy emphasized that Yates's relapse into psychosis was more plausibly linked to the discontinuation of Haldol 2 weeks earlier. Numerous media reports circulated allegations suggesting that Michael Wareniecki, a traveling preacher whom Russell had encountered during his time at Auburn University, might share responsibility for the tragic deaths. However, both Wareniecki and Russell vehemently denied these claims. Russell clarified that their relationship with Wareniecki was not especially close and did not contribute to Yates's delusions. Wareniecki asserted that his interactions with the Yates family were intended to strengthen their marriage and promote spiritual growth, emphasizing themes of love within Christian teachings. Both men agreed that any purported link between Wareniecki's teachings and Yates's mental state was a fabricated story created by the media. During her time in prison, Yates disclosed that she had harbored thoughts of harming her children for an extended period, lasting approximately 2 years. She expressed a profound belief that her children viewed her as an inadequate mother and conveyed worries regarding her son's developmental progress. According to her discussions with the jail psychiatrist, Yates articulated a deep-seated fear that her children were destined for damnation, as she perceived them to be lacking in righteousness. She lamented that her parenting methods were insufficient to guide them away from what she perceived as an inevitable fate of perishing in the fires of hell.
Taking the children's lives.
What were you thinking?
That I had to do it.
And what was the reason you thought to do it the next morning?
Because Rusty would be at work.
In August 2004, Russell initiated divorce proceedings, asserting that he and Yates had not lived together as a married couple since the day of the tragic events. The legal dissolution of their marriage was finalized on March 17, 2005. Subsequently, Russell embarked on a romantic relationship with Laura Arnold, whom he wed on March 25, 2006. Together, they celebrated the birth of a son. However, their marital bond encountered challenges, leading to Laura filing for divorce in 2015, ultimately bringing an end to their relationship. Yates's tragic story serves as a stark reminder of the profound impact untreated mental illness can have on individuals, their families, and loved ones everywhere. It underscores the urgent need for society to prioritize mental health awareness, support systems, and effective treatment options with compassion and understanding. In light of the events surrounding Yates, society must adopt a more comprehensive approach to supporting individuals facing severe mental health challenges in the world today. This includes increasing awareness and education, improving access to mental health services, and integrating mental health into healthcare. By addressing these areas comprehensively, we can create a more compassionate and supportive environment where individuals struggling with severe mental health issues receive the care, understanding, and resources they need to thrive. What are your thoughts on how we can better support those facing these challenges, and how do you think society can better address issues like this one? Please share your ideas and thoughts in the comments below. The next case we'll be looking at is the Parente family murders. This is the story of a family whose laughter was silenced forever. A father's loving embrace turned deadly. No one knew that dark secrets hid behind his smile. What horror drove him to unspeakable evil? 59-year-old William Michael Parente was born in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, to Willie and Rocalyn Parente. His father, Willie, was a police officer for the state of New York. Parente grew up in Bay Ridge, along with his parents, and spent summers with his family in Long Beach. He finished school at Brooklyn College and Brooklyn Law School, thanks to his uncle, Anthony J. Russo, who paid for his education at both schools. Parente married Betty Mozzarella in 1997. Betty was a stay-at-home mom who was very active in their community. After becoming a member of the New York Bar, which means he became a licensed lawyer, Parente joined a law firm on Wall Street. This was a big step in his career. In 1988, he decided to start his own law practice. He did this because Betty was pregnant with their first child. After moving to Garden City, New York, Parente and his family often returned to his old neighborhood in Brooklyn. His daughters, Stephanie and Catherine Parente, were well liked by their teachers and classmates. The family lived in a beautiful neighborhood in Garden City, New York, where the houses were worth millions of dollars. Their home was next to a golf course, making it a lovely place to live. Parente always commuted to Manhattan for work, while Betty spent her time volunteering for various causes. They often went back to Bay Ridge to visit friends, eat favorite foods, and see family members, especially Parente's mother. They also went back every year on Halloween, so his two daughters could trick-or-treat in the same neighborhood where Parente had trick-or-treated as a child. The family was close-knit and seemed to have a good life, but behind closed doors, something was terribly wrong. Later in his career, Parente was involved in making short-term loans, which he called bridge loans. A friend even commented that he essentially worked as a bank, which means he lent money to projects that were still waiting for approval. He made loans that were quite risky and had a high chance of not being paid back. To fund these loans, he allegedly used money from investments that he was in charge of. So whenever an investor would call him asking for their money back, Parente couldn't give it to them right away, and he couldn't clearly explain why he couldn't pay them back either. On April 20th, 2009, friends and college officials of 19-year-old Stephanie started to worry when she didn't show up to her classes on a particular Monday. They knew she wouldn't miss her final exams, so they felt something was wrong. The school was aware that the Parentes were visiting their daughter Stephanie, who was a sophomore at Loyola College in Baltimore, Maryland. So the college officials contacted a local hotel and asked them to check on Stephanie and her family. Stephanie's younger sister, Catherine, who was a 6th grader at Garden City Middle School, was also with them on this trip. At around 3 p.m., a housekeeper tried to enter the family's room on the 10th floor, but the door was locked and no one answered. The housekeeper told other staff members what happened. A hotel manager then went into the room and found Parente's lifeless body in the bathroom. He had taken his own life with a knife. The manager immediately called emergency services. The manager then continued into the room and found a horrific sight: 3 bodies arranged on one of the beds. The deceased were 58-year-old Betty and her 2 daughters, Stephanie and 11-year-old Catherine. The scene was extremely disturbing. The police from Baltimore County were called to the scene, and all other guests on the 10th floor were moved as part of the investigation.
59-year-old Parente bludgeoned, then killed his wife and 2 daughters. They died from asphyxiation. It all happened Sunday in a Sheraton hotel room in Baltimore, Maryland.
The family's Mercedes-Benz SUV was also taken from the hotel's parking lot by law enforcement officials as part of their investigation. The exact order of events was still very unclear and frightening. The authorities and investigators had to work hard to figure out what happened. After a thorough investigation, they finally determined that the deaths were caused by asphyxiation and blunt force trauma. After this discovery, more light was shed on the tragic events that occurred. The investigation showed that Betty and Catherine were likely the first victims, followed by Stephanie. Parente's violent outburst started with his wife and younger daughter before moving on to his older daughter. Law enforcement officials believed that one of Parente's last interactions was with Stephanie's roommate. She had tried to call Stephanie around midnight, not knowing that something terrible had already happened. Sadly, Stephanie had already been murdered by her father at that point, and her roommate's call came too late to save her. Parente picked the call, and Stephanie's roommate later reported that he sounded odd over the phone and did not sound like himself. After this call, it is believed that it was then that Parente went to the bathroom, feeling overwhelmed with guilt and shame. He then ended his own life with a knife he had bought from the mall earlier. This was the last death that occurred, marking the end of an entire family. A friend of Stephanie's, Gabrielle Page, who was 19 years old, told the Baltimore Sun that Stephanie was surprised when her family showed up for a visit. They had already planned to come see her that Friday, so it didn't make sense that they would come earlier. Gabrielle said Stephanie had a big chemistry test to study for and didn't really have time to be with them. She also said that Stephanie never mentioned her parents to her, nor did she ever mention any financial problems that they might have been going through. Stephanie never mentioned any family issues, and as far as she knew, there was nothing to worry about. She also mentioned that Stephanie's family had just called her and said they were in Baltimore, and it seemed like they decided to come on a whim. Gabrielle didn't understand the events that took place on that Sunday, and she didn't think any magnitude of financial problems made it any more understandable. Investigators believe that the reason behind the terrible actions was Parente's big financial problems, and because there was already an investigation going on regarding his financial activities. He knew he'd soon be exposed, even after he had kept everything private. While the Baltimore County Police were looking into the crime, they found out that Parente was being investigated by the FBI for a suspected scheme that might have cheated investors out of a huge amount of money, $20 million. Specifically, someone had made a complaint against Parente, saying that he had lost them $450,000. This was a very serious accusation, and the police were taking it very seriously. They were looking into all of the details to understand what had happened and how Parente was involved. At least 3 investors claimed they lost millions of dollars working with Parente. Some other people who invested money with Parente also said they lost a lot of money, at least $12 million, and maybe as much as $35 million. Some of these investors stated in the court papers that Parente was running a type of scam called a Ponzi scheme. They claimed that instead of using their money to invest, Parente was using money from some clients to pay returns to other clients, like a game of shuffling money around. He was paying returns of 12 to 15%, but it was all just a trick.
Now police may have the answer to that burning question, why? They're looking into the possibility that Parente may have run into some financial troubles. One New York attorney claims he lost $450,000 to Parente. FBI officials are now, quote, looking into Mr. Parente's investment business dealings.
Almost a year after the tragedy, a fight happened over the $5 million of life insurance money that belonged to Parente. This fight was caused by a special trial that happened after Parente's death to prove that he was the one who killed his family and himself. Dr. Marie-Jeanne Castadeau, a gynecologist from Manhattan, said in a written statement that Parente cheated her by lying and tricking her, and she said he did it on purpose. She also wanted a share of the money which she claims Parente cheated her out of, but proper investigation had to be done before any money could be dispersed. An FBI spokesman said that the FBI was looking into it. Some of Parente's friends and colleagues didn't believe that he cheated anyone. They were sure that the accusations were not true. One person appointed by the court to handle Parente's estate had also filed papers in Nassau saying that Parente didn't do anything wrong and couldn't have cheated people out of their money. Joseph Mazzarella, who was Betty's cousin and a funeral director in North Belmore, was in charge of taking care of the estates belonging to Betty and her daughters. He mentioned that Betty's 2 nieces, who were the daughters of her late sister, should get some of the life insurance money.
In the deserted Parente home, Joe Mazzarella and 3 family members come to pick out dresses to clothe their 2 dead nieces for the funeral.
Can you tell us how you're doing? I'm not doing very well, sweetheart. If you're missing 3 people that were dear to you, you wouldn't even ask that question. All right? So please, no more. Okay, please.
Joseph's lawyers even offered a deal to the group of investors who accused Parente of cheating them, saying they would be given 10 cents for every dollar they invested, but the investors refused the offer. Eric Milgram, a public administrator in Nassau, was in charge of Parente's estate. He was taking care of Parente's belongings and money because Parente's relatives, an elderly uncle and aunt and 7 cousins, didn't want to be involved. Even though they didn't want to be involved, there were possibilities that they got some of the life insurance money. Eric went to court to try to make everyone see that Parente might not have been responsible for the deaths and that Betty's family should get the life insurance money. In court papers, Eric had stated that Parente might have been insane or under a lot of pressure before the killings, and that would mean he wasn't responsible for what happened. Many people who were upset and demanded their money back would have to be handled by whoever ended up in control of the life insurance policy. These were co-workers, acquaintances, and clients of Parente's who claimed to have contributed funds for his investments. They were angry because they believed Parente had mishandled their funds. The surviving family members would have to decide how to respond to all of those demands and claims. Parente's investors thought they were lending him money to help construction projects that needed emergency loans. They believed he would use their money to help build buildings or fix houses. They gave him a lot of money over a period of almost 20 years. They thought they would get high interest rates in return and that he would pay them back with extra money added on top. But it turned out that Parente was not using the money for what he said he would. He was not using it to help construction projects at all. One of the people who lost most money was a dentist from Garden City named Anthony Salerno. He was the first person to tell the police that he thought Parente was running a scam. He told the police about his suspicions just a day after the bodies were found. According to court records, Anthony and his wife Kathleen gave Parente a whopping $950,000 from their savings account and $1 million from their retirement fund. They thought they were investing their money safely, but it was obvious that Parente was not honest with them. Anthony was overcome with emotion as he spoke to the detectives, his words filled with despair. He said his life was falling apart and he couldn't hide the pain. He wasn't ready to open up just yet, and he refused to comment further when he was asked. Meanwhile, the Baltimore County Police had handed over the investigation into Parente's financial troubles to the FBI, leaving Anthony unsure of whether he was ever going to get his money back. The police documents showed that on April 14th, Parente told his lifelong friend Dorothy Schimmel that someone had threatened his life and he was very scared. Dorothy, who was 84 years old and lived in Manhattan, said that Parente looked very bad and was mixed up with the wrong people. She said he didn't look good, and he seemed worried. The police were still trying to find the people who worked with Parente, but they hadn't found anyone yet. The detectives were also searching for answers, and they had to ask if the police were trying to find out who the wrong people Dorothy talked about were. A police officer, who wanted to stay anonymous, said that even though they were investigating and trying to learn more, they also thought it was possible that those wrong people were not real. The court case made the Parente family's personal life and money matters public for everyone to see. Their friends Stephanie Nguyen and Julianne Malley said that the Parentes were a family that cared a lot about their status and kept their lives very private. But now, court records showed that their wealth was not as solid as it seemed. They had very little money in the bank, less than $5,000. Their big house in Garden City, which was worth $1 million, had a big mortgage of $600,000 that they still owed. They also owned a condo in West Hampton, which was worth $250,000. But they owed $500,000 on 2 mortgages, and the bank eventually took it away. The people who lent money to Parente were demanding to be paid back. HSBC wanted $21,850. Citibank wanted $16,396, and Parente still owed $11,000 for his Mercedes-Benz car. All these debts added up, and the Parente's finances were a big mess. The court papers revealed that the Parente's status was a lie, built on shaky foundations. They appeared to be wealthy, but in reality they were struggling with debt. Parente was a man who was very careful and thorough, according to what his friends described him as. But surprisingly, he did not even have a will. His wife, Betty, also did not have a will. This left their family members very confused and wondering how this could be. Mazzarella, a family member, out of disbelief and curiosity, asked how it was possible that Parente could have been running a Ponzi scheme when he had no money in his bank accounts. He also couldn't figure out how to help the people who invested money with Parente because there was no money left. He said to the investigators that the investors Parente owed couldn't get anything back for what they had lost because they didn't have anything to give them. On a Monday night, the family and friends of the Parentes gathered outside a funeral home on Long Island, mourning their loss. They were there to say goodbye to Betty and her 2 daughters who had been killed in a very sad and violent way by the person they loved and trusted most, the father and husband.
But in the quiet neighborhood in Garden City, New York, where the family lived, well-wishers continue to lay flowers at the Parente doorstep. For them, it's hard to believe their own neighbor could have done such a thing, regardless of the reason.
The coffins were covered in flowers, but it was a closed casket funeral due to the state of the bodies, as at the time of the funeral, people were not aware of the motive behind their painful murders. Catherine's school said that she was a very special child who was loved by her teachers and the staff at her school. They thought she was wonderful, talented, and very sweet. Stephanie, the older daughter, was a strong and athletic person who had been on the women's crew team at Loyola University and had also helped the men's team as a coxswain. She was a kind and helpful person who had volunteered her time with Habitat for Humanity, an organization that builds homes for people in need, and at a Catholic school in Baltimore. She had also been accepted to study abroad in Newcastle, England next year, which was a great opportunity for her. Friends and neighbors were very surprised to hear the bad things and allegations that people were saying about Parente. He seemed like a successful lawyer who had a good life and a nice home in a neighborhood where the houses cost a lot of money. Nobody thought he would be involved in something like that. A funeral mass was held on a Tuesday to say goodbye to Betty and her daughters. There was also a private service and cremation for Parente, but it was separate from the funeral mass for his family. What are your thoughts on this case? What do you think drives people to wipe out their family like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. The last case we'll be looking at today is the Brom family massacre. In this bone-chilling familicide case, we will explore how and why David Brom slaughtered his picture-perfect family with an axe at just 16 years of age. Our love and respect goes out to all those who knew and loved Bernard, Paulette, Diane, and Richard Brom, and all those affected by this case. David Francis Brom was born on October 3, 1971, to Paulette and Bernard Brom in Cascade Township, Minnesota. He was the second child in what would become a family of 6. His older brother, Joseph Leonard Brom, known as Joe, was born on June 24, 1969. David's parents then welcomed their first daughter, Diane, on April 10, 1974, and their third son, Richard, known as Ricky, on July 25, 1976. Not much is publicly known about David's upbringing and early life, but he was a good student in high school. His attendance was excellent, his grades were solid B+, and he had positive relationships with his teachers. His Spanish teacher described him as an above-average student, saying he was pleasant, quiet, and they got along well. There were no signs or forewarnings at school indicating what would happen on February 18, 1988. But David's life at home told a different story. He had been suffering from progressive depression, which had emerged over several years and got worse and worse. Medical records show that this even led him to develop suicidal thoughts. To cope with his declining mental health, David tried to mask his pain by making others around him happy. This facade fooled everyone at school, where he was seen as the class clown, always jumping about and saying witty or entertaining things. But in 1987, David attempted to take his own life twice. The first suicide attempt occurred at the end of David's 9th grade year in June 1987, when he was only 16 years old. He tried to hang himself from a tree in the forest near his home, but changed his mind at the last minute. The second attempt happened towards the end of that summer in September. David overdosed on 45 sleeping pills, which he had gotten from a girl who used them for a sleeping disorder. After taking the pills, David got very sick and vomited, telling his parents he had the flu, which they believed. He was deeply serious about ending his life during this second attempt and later felt extremely disappointed that it had failed. David's depression and suicidal thoughts stemmed from a troubled relationship with his family, particularly his father, Bernard. These familial issues got much worse after David's brother Joe left. Joe had begun dressing in a punk style with heavy eyeliner and dark clothes, and his parents hated it. After many arguments about Joe's appearance and lifestyle, his parents eventually kicked him out of the house. Following Joe's eviction, Bernard and Paulette imposed even stricter rules and discipline on David and his younger siblings, seemingly in an attempt to prevent them from adopting a similar lifestyle. The Brom family. David's family was middle class and financially comfortable, and were well respected within their local community. Both parents were very careful about how they are perceived and did not want to be associated with any lifestyle or ideology that might tarnish their reputation. They had a strict curfew, which meant David and his siblings had to do household chores, and they allegedly punished them if they did not do it. While it's not confirmed, there are allegations that David's parents would hit him and his siblings and punish them if they did not do their chores quickly or to their satisfaction. David always sought his father's approval and validation, but found it impossible to achieve. The stricter discipline and the pressure to conform to his parents' standards added to his already unstable mental health. This struggle for acceptance and the increasingly tense home environment must have affected David's deepening depression and deteriorating mental state significantly.
The psychiatrists in this trial have testified that Brom suffers from some form of mental illness, their diagnosis ranging from severe depression to a split personality.
David's father, Bernard, was an engineer at the local IBM plant, while his mother, Paulette, had run a preschool program at their local church until she quit a couple of years before 1988 to spend more time with her kids. Known in the community for her sewing skills and creativity, Paulette was a well-regarded figure, and everyone seemed to like her. The entire family, except Joe, went every Sunday without fail to Pax Christi Catholic Church. The parents even hosted several church meetings at their home, with Bernard using his home computer almost only for church work. From the outside, the Brom family was seen as a model family, respected and admired within the community. The local pastor described David's parents as quiet leaders of the church, well respected by everyone. Neighbors also said there was no indication that something was wrong in the family. But despite this appearance, David silently struggled with serious emotional problems. He believed no adult would understand or take his issues seriously. Along with his thoughts of suicide, a dark seed began to grow in the back of David's mind. A seed that would soon take over with thoughts of murdering his family. David never directly shared these thoughts with his friends, but he hinted at them through a disturbing fantasy about a trip to Florida. He told one friend that in the summer of 1988, he wanted to take a van and go to Florida, where he planned to kill his parents. He also mentioned wanting to take a couple of girls with him, but he didn't specify who, and said he wanted to kill them too. At the time, his friend dismissed these statements as a sick joke, not something to be taken seriously. In another version of this fantasy, David would kill his family, steal the family van and money, and drive to Florida. There, he and two friends would live it up until they ran out of money, at which point David planned to end his life. A classmate later described this plan, saying that David himself and another friend, Angie, had a sort of vacation fantasy. They would add elements to make it more exciting, discussing how they would get to Florida, live off the money they had, get an apartment, and have fun. David said they could get a car by him killing his family. He would then call IBM to inform them of a death in the family, so his father would be taking off a few weeks, ensuring no one would be looking for them. These conversations seemed like harmless, at worst, daydreams to his friends. But they reflected the darker intentions in David's mind, intentions that would eventually lead to tragedy. Patty Price. Before the incident, Patty Price, who grew up with the Brom family, was at the Brom house for a sleepover. Diane Brom, David's sister, had her desk next to Patty's in their homeroom, where 4 desks were pushed together. On the Thursday of that week, Diane didn't show up for school, and it raised some concern among their classmates and teachers because her parents hadn't called in her absence. Rick, Diane's 5th grade brother, was also missing from school, which was unusual since Mrs. Brom, a stay-at-home mom, was typically strict about such things. That evening, Patty went about her day as usual. Her mom was the 8th grade math teacher at her school, and she was laying in the living room that night, working on algebra with her dad, because her mom refused to help with math homework. The atmosphere at Patty's home was calm, which was a direct contrast to what was happening at the Brom household at that time. That Thursday evening, a phone call came in after 8 o'clock, which was unusual in 1988. Patty's mom answered the phone, and it quickly became clear that something was very wrong. Normally a composed person, her mom started crying, which was an unusual and terrifying sound. Patty felt her body stiffen with dread as she sensed the gravity of the situation.
A phone call came in, and it was after 8. And back then in '88, that was not normal to have the phone ring after 8 o'clock at night. And my mom got on the phone, and my mom never cried, and she just started wailing. It was really unusual. And I remember just my body stiffening because that was so unusual. And she hung up the phone and came in, and she just couldn't get words out at first. And she said, Patty, you're going to die. I don't know how to tell you this. But Diane's dead. And my body went from being stiff to being stiffer. And my dad's body completely stiffened around me as well. And from that moment forward, it was like a dark cloud had surrounded me, and I couldn't move. And I did move. I got up. My only sister at home at the time was a senior in high school. And so, and my grandma lived with us at the time too. So all I remember about the rest of that night is we found out the whole family was found murdered. David was missing. David was like an older brother to me.
When her mom finally managed to speak, she struggled to get the words out. "Patty, you're not going to believe this," she said, her voice breaking. "Diane is dead." Patty's body went from stiff to completely paralyzed with shock. Her dad was lying beside her, who was also tensed up. Her oldest sister, a high school senior, and her grandma were also at home. That night, the family learned that the entire Brom family had been murdered, and David was missing. David, who had been like an older brother to Patty, had just gone cross-country skiing with her and Diane the previous Sunday. He was a super nice kid, which made the news even more baffling. The next morning, Patty went to school, and walking into St. Pius felt surreal, like entering a ghost town. Everyone was eerily quiet. Patty first passed Ricky's 5th grade classroom, where she saw people but heard nothing. In the 8th grade hallway, Diane's chair was still on her desk, placed there by the cleaners. Patty and another friend cleaned out Diane's desk. As for David, Patty was convinced he had either been kidnapped or had escaped, not yet knowing the full extent of the horror that had unfolded. That morning, David told a friend that he had killed his family. It wasn't the first time he had said something like that, but his friends always thought he was joking, never imagining he could actually do something so terrible. But the police were called after the rumor reached the school staff. When they arrived at the Brom family house, the scene they encountered was beyond words, a horror that defied description. Olmsted County Sheriff Kevin Torgerson, who was a deputy at the time, often reflects on his 34-year career in law enforcement, with no case more impactful than February 18, 1988. With only 4 years of experience, 2 of which were in Rochester, he was dispatched to perform a welfare check at the Brom home. As the sun set around 5:23 p.m., Torgerson decided to wait for his backup before proceeding. Once his partner arrived, they knocked at the door, but there was no response. Torgerson and his partner carefully proceeded up the stairs. At the top, he saw the feet of 2 females lying on the floor. The sight confirmed their worst fears. As he stepped into Ricky's room, he found Ricky laying in bed in a fetal position, with severe head injuries and multiple other wounds, clutching a small blanket. But how and why did he do it?
I've got all the snapshots still in my head, and they're there, and the sensations, the smell, the different thoughts and the sounds that I was experiencing. I mean, they're right here. They have never gone away.
The murders. On the evening of Wednesday, February 17, 1988, at around 11:30 p.m., David was hanging out in his bedroom when his father, Bernard, walked in and started threatening him. In the last few months, David had become more invested in the punk and heavy metal scene, and even had a music collection. It was this collection that Bernard threatened to take away if David didn't change his attitude. Whether this was related to the lifestyle David was delving into or due to an incident about David's attitude earlier that day is unclear. During this heated conversation, Bernard pushed David, causing him to fall backward onto a table. Overcome with fear and petrified of being struck again, David fled the room. At some point between 1:30 a.m. and 3 a.m. on Thursday, February 18th, David called a friend he had spoken to about the Florida trip and asked if she would skip school the next day if he were to murder his parents that night. After making the call, David returned to his bedroom and began listening to music again. During this time, he thought heavily about his situation and feelings, thinking about all the consequences before murdering his entire family. At about 3 a.m., David left his bedroom and headed towards the garage, tiptoeing through the family home, careful not to cause any noise that might wake his family. When David reached the garage, he carefully picked up a long-handled axe. At some point, he also picked up a steak knife. Armed with both, he entered the room where his parents were peacefully sleeping. David claimed he did not remember hitting anyone, but did recall a lot of screaming, not just from his victims, but also from himself. The aftermath. Afterwards, David was in his room, packing things like blankets. All the lights were on, and he had to go into each room. His brother was in his bedroom, and his mother and sister in the hall, with blood everywhere. David then called a friend immediately after the slaying and confessed everything to her. In just a matter of moments, David had murdered his father, Bernard Brom, who was 41 years old, his mother, Paulette Brom, who was also 41 years old, his little brother, Richard, known as Ricky, who was 11 years old, and his little sister Diane, who was 13 years old. David left the axe, the murder weapon, near the bottom of the basement stairs as he packed up his things. At about 3:30 a.m., shortly after committing the murders, David tried to phone another friend, but hung up when his friend's father answered. At some point afterwards, David took the family's van and drove to a local bank where he withdrew money using his mother's bank card. He then drove to a local supermarket where he bought cigarettes and snacks. Following this, David drove to a spot overlooking his friend's house so he could see when she left for school in the morning. When he saw her, she asked her to skip school. The two then drove to a nearby park where they hung out for a short while before driving to the bank where David withdrew more money.
In the middle of the night on February 18, 1988, 16-year-old David Brom killed 4 of his family members. His parents, Bernard and Paulette, and younger siblings, 14-year-old Diane and 9-year-old Rick, all murdered with an axe.
After leaving the park, David and his friend went to the friend's house, where the friend shaved the sides of David's head. The hair shaving didn't go well, so they decided to go to Kmart to purchase a razor. When they returned, David's friend finished the punk haircut David wanted, shaving the sides and creating a design with lines in the back. Shortly after, David had to hide in the friend's closet when the friend's mother unexpectedly came home. Once she left, the friend went back to school, and David drove to a different school where he met other friends for lunch. During lunch, he convinced one of these friends to dye his hair. The first attempt failed, so David went back to his family home to try again. The home, still containing the bodies of his murdered family, was where he dyed his hair downstairs. After dyeing his hair, David met up with another friend to return a book bag and said he was in deep trouble. He mentioned that he planned to sleep under a bridge that night and walk to the Twin Cities in the morning. At 5:23 p.m., concerned neighbors of the Brom family called the police and requested a welfare check. Following the call, 2 officers went to the Brom family home. They arrived shortly before 6 p.m. and found the front door closed but not locked. As they entered the house, they called out into the silence, but no one answered. When they made their way towards the stairs to the second floor, they were confronted with a gruesome scene. The entire Brom family was slaughtered, except for the eldest son, Joe, and David. A quick examination of the bodies revealed they were in a state of rigor mortis, which meant they had been dead for longer than 12 hours. Subsequently, the police issued a nationwide alert for David. They tracked down Joe Brom, the eldest sibling, who was working as a cook at a local restaurant, and informed him of his family's deaths. But David was nowhere to be seen. In the meanwhile, David was actually sighted by one of his teachers at a local shopping center that evening. The family's van, which David had been driving, was found by the authorities at about 11 p.m. near a Methodist hospital. David spent the night of that Thursday in a culvert near his home. At about 8:30 a.m. on Friday, February 19, 1988, a citizen saw David using a payphone at a post office and reported him to the police. He was then arrested inside the post office and brought in for questioning. The trial. As David was 16 years old at the time of his arrest, he was initially charged in the juvenile justice system. However, after a hearing, he was referred to be prosecuted as an adult.
Remember the reports?
The question Olmsted County authorities must decide now is whether to charge David Brom as a juvenile or as an adult.
Watch the Brom family murder story play out on national television.
Good evening. Topping tonight's News 11, police charge a 16-year-old boy with 4 counts of first-degree murder after his family is found axed to death in their Rochester home.
The trial had 2 phases, as required by Minnesota law. The first phase focused on determining whether David was guilty of first- or second-degree murder in relation to the deaths of his parents and siblings. During this phase of David's trial, the defense sought to introduce expert psychiatric testimony to see if David was mentally fit, but the trial court denied this request, and as a result, the defense rested its case without presenting any testimony. The jury was told not to consider evidence of David's mental illness during Phase 1 deliberations. Despite this, the jury found David guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder. Moving to Phase 2 of the trial, David had to prove his legal insanity as the evidence was too strong. The defense presented testimony from a psychiatrist who concluded that David did not understand that killing his parents and siblings was wrong at the time of the murders, and argued he was legally insane. On the other hand, the state countered with testimony from 4 psychiatrists. 2 of these experts said that David was not legally insane during the murders, while the other 2 did not offer an opinion on his legal mental illness. All the experts agreed that David suffered from some form of mental illness or impairment, and even the psychiatrist who testified for the prosecution acknowledged that David was mentally ill and suggested that David may have killed his family to avoid committing suicide. David's older brother Joe had a verified alibi for the day of the murders, and forensic analysis revealed palm prints on the murder weapon matching David's prints. The trial concluded with Brom receiving 3 consecutive life sentences, with a minimum of 52 years before parole eligibility.
Good evening. David Brom is guilty. The jury reaffirmed its earlier decision and found Brom was sane when he killed his parents, younger brother, and sister with an axe. And that story tops tonight's News 11.
The jury deliberated more than 21 hours over 3 days before reaching the second verdict shortly before noon today.
Today's guilty verdict comes 20 months after the bodies of Brom's family were found in their suburban Rochester home and ends one of Minnesota's most publicized trials.
The case involving David Brom's murders still had attention months later, with speculation circulating about the possible influence of Negative Land, a Bay Area music group known for their satirical and critical content. Negative Land's music addresses topics such as mass media, nuclear war, and handguns, often using humor to convey their messages. But their song Christianity is Stupid became an important point of investigation, as the police wondered whether it sparked a dispute among the Brom family, potentially contributing to the tragic murders. Negative Land members expressed disbelief that their music, intended as satire, could have played any role in such a serious and tragic event. They were cooperative with federal authorities, who requested the group cancel their planned tour and refrain from live performances until the investigation concluded. What are your thoughts on David Brom's mental state during the time of the murders? Do you believe he was mentally fit to stand trial? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you want more videos like this, please be sure to like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more true crime videos. Take care and see you in the next one.